Savvy New Yorkers know the signs of early spring, frisbees in the air in the parks, crowded bicycle lanes, and flocks of moviegoers heading to the Film Society of Lincoln Center for Rendezvous with French cinema. The annual event offers cinephiles the opportunity to see the crème de la crème of French production of the last year. Screen legend Carole Bouquet talks about her role in Andre Techine's romantic thriller Unforgivable, set in Venice.
It is like a thriller, but about sentiment. It's very peculiar because it's not, an action movie, but it's an action movie about human desire, and that's what it is about. And of course, fantasy. You never see the person you live with, the man you're in love with, the woman you're in love with, the way they are. Never. And it's always fantasies, of course. Sometimes in our lives, you do cross and you get close. But it's very rare, those moments. And most of the time anyway, it's interpretation. That's what we do all the time, all of us. The really beauty of that movie is that the man who's not a teenager, I'm talking about Andre Techine, says that love is possible. And when somebody says that and is very young, I'm not that impressed. But when somebody like Techine, who's a very conscious man and really looks in depth in characters, that's what he has been doing since the beginning of his movies, says, yes, love is possible. And with all the turmoil, with all the vicissitude, I don't know if you say that in English, I love that word in Italian and in French, vicissitudes in French. The difficulties, the ups and downs, whatever, life. Yes, you can love each other. Yes, you can relate to somebody. Yes, sometimes you do meet somebody, another human being that you can connect. I was really moved by that, extremely moved by, because it's a very generous and intelligent at the same time, way of telling the story. That's what he does in the movie.
Actor Tahar Rahim tells Canape about Free Men, which dramatizes the role of Algerians in the French resistance during World War II.
We met with Ismail, we talked a lot, and I found this story that I didn't know, that a lot of people didn't know too. It deals with those men who stands for a long time under the shadow.
Et les ravitaillements, c'est pour qui? Pour moi. Allez, emmène-le.
Il n'est pas juif, c'est un mahométan.
Je te propose un marché. Tu vas surveiller les entrées et les sorties de toutes les personnes qui rendent visite au directeur. Encore surtout les visiteurs étrangers à la mosquée.
Everything is true, but he's a fiction. But he's a fiction character inspired by a lot of people who has really existed. I mean, those people called invisible men. And he wanted to show them as real human being and humble heroes, and very humble. Those people who were always on the edge and in the shadow. C'est quelqu'un qui au début pense qu'à lui, à sa famille, qui a une mission qui est d'apporter de l'argent. Et au fur et à mesure, il va être embrigadé dans des choses qui vont tout doucement l'amener vers ça et découvrir en fait que son but principal était de ramener le combat pour la liberté dans son pays.
J'étais au courant depuis le début.
Là, ça me demander.
J'ai des documents à remettre à une personne dans le 11e arrondissement. Je ne vais pas prendre de risque pour des gens que je connais pas. Allez, j'ai déjà assez de problèmes. Inès, il y a qu'à toi que je peux demander ce service.
Il n'y a personne. La famille a été arrêtée ce matin. Les parents les ont amenés ce matin avant que la police ne débarque. On ne peut pas les garder ici. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire?
Director Mathieu Demy explains the threads of France, California, and Mexico in his film Americano.
I've started, acting in French films like 20 years ago, and I've been doing that a lot, and I really enjoy it. And maybe this is the reason why when I started to write some stories, I pictured myself in that story. And I guess I find this is the most interesting way to do films for me at the moment, is to try to tell some really intimate stuff in a fiction, in something that is not a documentary at all, and that is, you know, obviously a fiction and obviously a tale. So yeah, in the film there are many bridges between reality and fiction, but these bridges are when you know the backstory, when you know a little bit more about my background, but you don't have to know that to enjoy the film. You know, I really wanted to make a film that everybody could see. I thought it was interesting to travel and to forge your identity through, you know, through this journey. So yeah, he finds his identity, but not even in the States. He has to cross another border. He finds it in Mexico. So yeah, it's really a film about traveling and finding more who you are. And the whole film is a little bit of metaphor for that character that I play, of me, you know, becoming a filmmaker and trying to also find my way through that.
560 € avant la naissance et 748 après.
Oh, non, mais si on met tout en commun, on peut prendre un immense appart. Avec des grandes gens. On s'organise. On sera émancipés, comme ça on se tapera pas les éducateurs et leur foyer. Là.
Ouais, on n'aura pas d'horaire du genre, enfin, on doit rentrer le soir à une certaine heure et tout. On se gère, quoi.
Ouais, comme on sera ensemble, on pourra s'organiser. Faudra surtout s'organiser pour faire des tours. Ouais, pour tout ce qui est chiant.
Ouais, vaisselle, ménage et tout, quoi.
Mais surtout, on n'entendra plus jamais les réflexions du style... Range ta chambre. viens manger. Refais ton lit. Non mais refaire son lit, quoi. J'ai jamais compris. Étant donné qu'on s'y retrouve juste tous les soirs.
It's a kind of collective utopia among those girls. They have nothing to build this utopia, only their bodies. And they decide to make changes with their bodies, you know, to become powerful with their bodies being pregnant. And it happened in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And in fact, when we saw pictures about Gloucester, it was very similar to our hometown, Lorient. You know, it's a fishing port, it's a town, middle-range town on the ocean. So we thought that it was not so far-fetched to take the real facts and adapt it in our hometown in Lorient. At the end of the film, we say, of course, the future is not going to be so pink, so happy for those girls, but at least they dreamt of something else, and this is what counts today. Don't, in French we say, lower the dream ceiling. I don't know if this is something in English, mais abaisser le plafond de ses rêves. And we must not do that. Dreaming is something very important, just to change the future, or to think of another future.
Ils disent qu'elle est trop petite et qu'elle risque d'y rester. Non mais c'est des conneries ça, c'est pour nous faire peur. De toute façon ils savent faire que ça. Ils ont peur de tout. Ils ont peur de vieillir, ils ont peur de mourir, ils ont peur de faire leur boulot.
Justevindemerde.com.
Comparisons of New York and Paris are so common as to be a cliché. But like all clichés, there is something essential at stake. But how to get to the truth? That's what's at stake in the new book of graphic design by Bahram Muratyan, Paris versus New York, a tally of two cities. In the artist's words, it's a friendly visual match between two cities told by a lover of Paris wandering through New York. Details, clichés, contradictions, this way please. Canape catches up with the creator on the ground in Paris and New York.
On est dans un quartier qui s'appelle Belleville, qui a longtemps été considéré comme un quartier super populaire. La grenade, c'est un fruit qui symbolise un peu mes origines arméniennes. Moi, l'idée, c'était qu'on aille vers le parc de Belleville, qu'on monte tout en haut pour apprécier la vue de Paris. C'est Paris qu'on voit jamais, en fait, ici, je trouve. J'ai voulu essayer de comprendre pourquoi j'étais autant attiré par New York et pourquoi Paris me manquait quand j'étais à New York et inversement. Donc comme une espèce de balance, j'ai essayé de jauger, de juger un peu les différences. C'était un peu cet amour pour New York que je voulais aussi déclarer à Paris et inversement. Après c'est devenu quelque chose que beaucoup de gens se sont appropriés parce que apparemment je n'étais pas le seul à ressentir ce manque des deux côtés. Et la question c'est ce qu'il faut choisir. Voilà. est en haut du parc de Belleville. Donc si on regarde par là, on a une super belle vue. Quel angle de la ville j'ai envie d'aborder? Est-ce que c'est aussi bien la verdure que l'urbanisation, que une petite mode passagère, une habitude de vie? C'est un peu l'ADN des deux villes.
Je m'en vais, j'emmène à plat, je laisse tomber.
On est sur la High Line, donc j'avais fait une image justement qui comparait la High Line à la coulée verte. Alors, c'est pas la coulée verte vraiment, c'est la promenade plantée à Paris. C'est un peu dans la mouvance green, on va dire. Donc on retourne dans les deux villes, justement. Il y a une force dans New York de vouloir se réinventer et d'aller très vite, de pas s'attarder. Donc on passe déjà à autre chose, déjà que c'est sorti, on passe déjà à autre chose et Paris est plus lente, quelque chose qui s'installe. Voilà, c'est aussi ce rapport-là, c'est-à-dire le côté éphémère, le côté langoureux et peut-être rattaché à une notion de relation aussi. C'est devenu un match amical et visuel. Comme ça je l'ai appelé parce qu'il y a deux gagnants pour moi. Sur le papier ça paraît simple, il ne faut pas que ça ait l'air simpliste. Donc il y a toujours quelque chose à trouver de différent et quelque chose qui ne soit pas lame comme ils disent aux US. J'écris énormément de mots que je mets en association. Donc les dessins sur le carnet de croquis ils sont tout simples déjà, c'est du travail vectoriel. Donc ça reste très géométrique, mais il faut arriver à quelque chose de pur dans la ligne. C'est beaucoup d'aplats, des couleurs qui doivent aller ensemble pour moi, qui me semblent être justes par rapport au sujet, ou qui semblent être complètement à l'opposé du sujet pour le faire éclater. On organise une expo au Shop at the Standard pour accueillir le book signing, donc la signature, la dédicace, la rencontre avec les gens qui m'ont suivi ici. C'est deux très bons exemples de villes bordéliques, grisantes, overwhelming comme ils disent ici, mais je trouve que justement il y a un côté jamais ennuyeux et tourbillonnesque qui donne énormément d'inspiration. Pendant ce travail, je ne me suis pas dit à une seule minute que ça allait amener tout ça en fait. Et finalement de là, en fait, du livre, ça me permet de peut-être pouvoir y aller plus souvent encore et travailler encore plus souvent avec New York, donc c'est parfait, une boucle est bouclée on va dire. Pas une ville préférée, j'ai plutôt un mode de vie préféré, c'est celui-là, c'est-à-dire être dans les transports, parmi les gens. Je pense que j'aime observer, être constamment nourri et je peux trouver ça vraiment facilement ici, mais aussi bien à Bombay qu'à Buenos Aires et je rêve d'aller à Tokyo, donc on verra pour la suite.
I've got a trouble in mind. I've got a trouble in mind. I've got a trouble in mind. Tu vois dans les blaireaux.
There is no better place to take the pulse of art in the USA than the 2012 biennial at the Whitney Museum of American Art. In this year's version, one of the most American pieces is created with the hand of French avant-garde artist Gisèle Vienne. With a text by American writer Dennis Cooper, Last Spring, a prequel stages a teenager performed by an animated ventriloquist doll who is engaged in a schizophrenic dialogue with a glove puppet.
It's a very ambivalent piece. It puts the audience in this weird situation that it's facing obviously a doll, and the visitor very easily projects a conscience on this doll, even if we know it's a doll, even if we're in the States in 2012 and we can have a very rational relation to objects. So I like this still magical, confusing relation we have to this.
Écoutez-moi une minute, s'il vous plaît. J'ai vraiment besoin de votre aide. Oh non. Il va parler. C'est toujours dans mon bras que je sens que ça va commencer. Comme un infarctus.
I mean, it's a classical situation for theater since the Egyptian. I mean, that was always a challenge to make the dead people speaking through dolls or through masked characters or through unmasked performers. We can see that in pagan or religious ritual, the representation of death or of violence or of things that we're scary of is very central. And if it's that central, it's certainly because it's something that is very necessary to us.
La marionnette m'appelle Charles. Je ne sais pas pourquoi. Ça ne sonne pas juste. Je n'arrive pas à la retirer de ma main.
Je m'attarde sur la tête car, quoique étrangement plate et lourde, elle était la seule merveille de son corps. Non, je mentionnerai également le cou, si fin et laiteux que sa tête aurait tout aussi bien pu être un vase d'où jaillissait chair, os et sang pour s'engouffrer dans un trou entre ses épaules.
We're in this society where light is good and where happy is good and where heavy and darkness is bad, and so we're in this very simplified sometimes approach, and I think it's totally right when in the art fields what we call perversion is invading the art field. And I think it's like ritual is of course totally harmless in the end. It's just to bring some spiritual experience and some physical experience to the viewer and to challenge him on some desires and thoughts he or she had.
Ridden with the grace and detail that he admired in the writers that he published, Richard Seaver's posthumous book, The Tender Hour of Twilight, stands by Woody Allen's lovely Midnight in Paris as an evocation of Americans fascinated by France. There is one important difference. Allen's movie is fantasy. Seaver's volume is a memoir. Canape discusses his importance with his partner, editor, and widow, Jeannette.
We were all feeling the ferment of the afterwar, which was wonderful, sense of sincere, true liberation. And Americans were heroes. To me, they were. Us kids would follow American soldiers. It was an oddity to us, and they would hand us chocolate and chewing gum. We'd never seen chewing gum. So there was a very sense of effervescence and happy moment of freedom and liberation. Dick had graduated from university. He received 3 grants that he couldn't say no to, that assured him a year in Paris, studying, discovering, speaking. So he left. He arrived in Paris, so excited he was an English major, and it was all about, you know, the myth of Paris and the literature. The hosts had a son who invited his buddy, the American young intellectual in Paris, and that's where I met Dick. I met him 1 year, and I didn't see him for a year. And then we met again the following Christmas Eve. It's the same place, same beautiful place. and we went out together for New Year's Eve. And 6 months later, we were married. It was big romance. And in fact, that romance has started then and continued until the last minute of his life. We were in love and having a romantic life together for a great many years. It was quite a fairy tale. This is it. He lived Rue du Sabot. It's a tiny, tiny little street on the left bank. And there's another one called Rue Bernard Palissy. And in order to get to the Place Saint-Germain, you kind of had to walk through. And he sees in the window Molloy and Malonda. And because he was writing his thesis on Joyce, it just piqued his interest. Totally mysterious. So he walks in thinking there were translations from English. He walks into the tiny little, charming little Édition Minuit, wanting to know whether they were translations. And the lady said, no, no, they're written in French. Huh, in French? So he bought 2 copies and non-stop read one after the other, and was, as I say in my introduction, was an intellectual explosion for him. It was an extraordinary moment. He was associated with a group of very interesting poets, writers, a Scotsman, a South African, an American, a Brit, who had formed this very remarkable, important literary magazine in Paris, but in English language. And they were looking, of course, to find French writers. So someone had recommended this Dick Seaver to them as someone who really knew the scene, the literary scene. And there's a very funny moment in the book, which I read the other night, where he's being interviewed by Alex Strokey, the head of Merlin, to find the French writers. And he says, I've got 2 or 3 extraordinary writers. One in particular, said Dick, but it's an Irishman. His name is Samuel Beckett. And Alex Strokey was very irritated. He said, yeah, but I'm not interested in Irish writing. I'm interested, I thought you knew everybody in Paris. And he said, I do, but those are the most important writers. And they happen to live here and to write in French. Also, Dick said, there's Eugène Ionesco, who also writes in French, and is Romanian. And poor Alex Strokey thought, we've got a bummer here. We want French writing. And Dick said, trust me, these are the most important literary voices now. And so he wrote a letter, care of Édition Minuit, to Beckett. They had kind of given up at the Merlin Group on Beckett. It was like pie in the sky. Unknown writer, doesn't reply, on to the next. And one rainy evening, they were all cooking, the group of friends, and the knock on the door, and he describes in the book this gaunt figure, totally soaked from the rain, handed him an envelope. He said, I thought you were interested, and here it is. And he said, won't you come in? No, no, I've got to go. And this is what? What is the name of the novel? And Dick was overwhelmed, closed the door, and everybody around his fellow writers who were there, what was that? And he said, that's what? And they said, remember that funny kind of Beckettian dialogue? What do you mean, what's what? It's what, etc. And they all read through the night, laughing, and each one took chapters until their voice got hoarse and they couldn't read anymore. And there began their association from that moment on. They published it at Merlin, and the rest is history. A few months later, the same director who had directed the radio play put it on stage at the Théâtre Babylone, a very tiny, small, off-Broadway theater. And Dick was bowled over. He was really in love with the man's mind and work. And when we started dating in January, he asked me to come to see Godot, wondering how that would sit with me. And I loved it. And it was very, I think, in a funny way, I think that was a test in our relationship. If I had come out saying, whatever, that would have been a very black mark. But I happened to really like it a lot. But you know, that production had been going on for months. There were 5 people in the theater. It had gotten terrible reviews from the theater critics. Really bad reviews, damning reviews. The equivalent here would mean that the theater would close, but they persisted. Thank goodness. And gradually over a long time, the theater filled up, and then the word of mouth began.